I was fixing Emika's tie when I saw the name on the invitation. My fingers went still. The silk slipped from my hands. Emika, my beautiful 3-year-old, looked up at me with Maria's eyes, that same still, unreadable dark, and tugged my wrist, giggling, wanting me to finish. He had no idea why his mother had stopped breathing. He didn't know that name. Chinita Obi. Guest of honor. The gala was tonight. I hadn't spoken that name aloud in 4 years. I hadn't needed to. We had buried it, Mario and I, under a new life, a new city, a new last name that made men lower their voices when they heard it. Barres. But here it was, printed in gold on heavy cream cardstock like a wound that refused to close. Emika didn't know his mother had once been thrown out of a house in London with nothing but a suitcase and a lie. Barren, they had called me. Broken. He didn't know that the man on that invitation had stood in front of their friends, their family, their God, and used me as a cautionary tale for years after I was gone. How long had Chinita been in this city? How long had he been this close? I never planned to become the wife of a man who made governments nervous. But Mario Barres didn't look like power when I first saw him. He was sitting alone at the far end of a conference table in Milan. Everyone else had crowded the opposite side, leaving a careful, fearful distance between themselves and him. He looked like a man who had long since stopped expecting anyone to sit beside him. Still. Patient. A dark suit with no tie, neck tattoos climbing above his collar, like something beautiful he'd never bothered to hide. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He didn't need to. The room had already told me everything about what he was. But his hands, tattooed, folded, perfectly still, were resting on the table. And he was holding a photograph of a child that looked nothing like him. That is where I should have turned around. What I did instead changed both our lives. So tell me, are you enjoying the story and the value so far? If you are, then you're already part of the vibe here. Go ahead and subscribe, drop a like, and introduce yourself in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. The moment I walked through those doors, Chinita saw me. I watched his expression move through surprise, then amusement, then something uglier, the particular cruelty of a man who has never been made to pay for anything. He raised his glass. Gentlemen. His voice carried across the marble floor like a blade. You see that woman? I was married to her. He laughed, that same laugh I used to hear in my nightmares. For years. For years I waited for her to give me something. A son. A daughter. Anything. He shook his head with theatrical pity. God himself couldn't put life in a dead field. The room didn't laugh with him. But it didn't stop him either. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I had learned stillness from the most dangerous man alive, and I wore it now like armor. My hand found my stomach. And then the temperature in the room dropped. It was subtle at first, the way conversations died at the far end of the hall, one cluster at a time, like candles being snuffed out in sequence. The waitstaff stopped moving. I saw the moment Chinita noticed the security detail, 6 men in black, cutting silently through the crowd, parting it like water. He frowned. He didn't understand yet. His finger was still pointed at me when the oak doors opened a second time, and every powerful person in that room took one instinctive step back. Every person except me. I still remember the sound of my suitcase hitting the floor of the hallway. Not the shouting. Not the words, though God knows those carved themselves into me deep enough. It was that sound. Plastic on marble. The sound of a life being returned like damaged goods. You are nothing but a beautiful, empty vessel, Chinita had said.
Calm.
Almost bored. His mother stood behind him in the doorway of our kitchen, arms folded, satisfied. I need a real woman, not a curse walking around in one. I had loved him for 6 years. He handed me my coat like a receipt. London in November is not kind to women with nowhere to go. I sat in my car outside his house for 40 minutes before I could make my hands work. I called no one. There was no one to call who wouldn't have said I told you so or come home, Grace, and I couldn't bear either. So I drove. I drove until the city swallowed me whole, until the streets were unfamiliar, and the silence felt like freedom instead of punishment. I didn't know then that I was driving directly toward the most dangerous man in Europe. I didn't know he'd been expecting me. The agency told me the client was private sector finance. They told me to dress conservatively, speak only when spoken to, and under no circumstances ask about the nature of the business. I should have known then. The conference room was on the 42nd floor, all glass and cold light, and every man in it looked at me when I entered. Except Mario. He was reading. A single sheet of paper, held with the casual certainty of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. I sat down across from him and opened my notebook. "You're not afraid," he said. Still reading. "Should I be?" I replied. He looked up. That was the moment. I know it now. The precise second the trajectory of my entire life changed. Not with fireworks, not with thunder, but with a man tilting his head slightly, studying me the way people study things they intend to keep. He smiled.
"Just barely."
"No," he said. "Not of me." Months later, I was living in his world, translating his meetings, decoding his ledgers, learning the particular silence of a man who expressed love through proximity rather than words. He never rushed me, never demanded, just moved closer, steadily, like a tide that had decided. The morning I saw the positive test, my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped it twice. I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. Then I heard Mario's voice outside the door, low, quiet, as if he'd already known. "Grace." He'd been standing there the whole time. "Quick one, are you enjoying how this story is unfolding? Because right when you think you understand it, something unexpected is about to happen. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment your prediction before it happens. Let's see who gets it right." Nobody tells you what it costs to become a ghost. I deleted every social account, changed my number, told no one from my old life where I had gone, not my cousin in Peckham, not my university friends, not a single person who might accidentally mention my name in a room where Chinita's people were listening. Mario's world demanded invisibility, and for once in my life, disappearing felt like power rather than punishment. I learned quickly. You don't ask what happens in the meetings you're excluded from. You don't react when men with guns nod at your husband in restaurants. You don't flinch when the security rotation outside your bedroom door changes at 3 a.m. You grow your son in silence, and you trust the walls. Emeka came into the world on a Tuesday, surrounded by Mario's doctor, Mario's staff, Mario's absolute, terrifying devotion. He held our son like something sacred, like proof of something he'd stopped believing in. For 8 months, I thought we were safe. Then my phone rang, unknown number, and a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years said my name. Not Grace Burries. My old name. Chinita's name for me. My blood went cold. He knew. Mario didn't ask me.
He told me.
Not cruelly. He was never cruel, but with that absolute, quiet finality that meant the decision had already been made, the arrangements already in motion, and my input was welcome but not required. "The Ashford Gala," he said, sliding the invitation across the breakfast table like it was nothing. "Saturday." I looked at the name printed in gold. Felt my stomach turn. "He'll be there," I said. "I know." I looked up. Mario was watching me with that still, unreadable expression, the one that had once frightened me and now felt like the safest place on earth. "Mario." "For years," he said quietly, "you have been a ghost because of a man who deserves to be forgotten. My son will not grow up watching his mother hide." He paused. "Neither will this one." His eyes dropped briefly to my stomach, back to my face. "It ends Saturday." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that Chinita wasn't worth the exposure, wasn't worth the risk of dragging Mario's world into the light of a public event where anything could go wrong. But I knew that expression. The decision was already made. What I didn't know, what Mario hadn't told me, was that Chinita had made his own preparations. That he'd spent weeks building a case, collecting rumors, whispering Mario's name into the ears of people with badges and jurisdiction. Saturday wasn't just a gala. It was a trap. And only one of them knew it. Stay with me until the end, because this story will shock you to the core. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video. Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from.
Now.
Mario walked in holding Emika's hand. That was all it took. The room didn't gasp, it simply stopped. Every conversation, every clinking glass, every carefully constructed social performance, suspended in a single collective breath as Mario Barres moved through the crowd toward me, our 3-year-old son beside him, those dark eyes scanning the room with a child's uncanny instinct, landing on me, lighting up.
Mana.
The word rang out like a verdict. I watched Chanita's face perform its collapse in stages. Confusion first. Then recognition. Emika's features, undeniably mine. Then the full, devastating arithmetic of it hitting him all at once. Mario reached me, kissed my temple, placed one hand on my stomach, the other on our son's shoulder, and turned to face the room with the relaxed authority of a man who had already won. He didn't address Chanitu. He didn't need to. The silence did it for him. Chanita's new wife was already touching his arm, asking something, sensing something, and he was shrinking, visibly, publicly, irreversibly. It should have ended there. It should have been enough. But then Mario's most trusted guard appeared at his shoulder, lips at his ear, and I watched something shift behind my husband's eyes. Something cold. Something that meant Saturday had just become much more dangerous than a gala.